So, the topic of our session today, when the going gets tough. I think we're all here in very unprecedented tough times. So, our session pretty much will cover, what are the challenges that we are facing right now. A lot of times when we don't have sufficient information, what happens is we tend to jump into a lot of misconceptions. So what this session is going to do is we're going to come up with some clarity, and with that clarity we hope that we have some focus in terms of how we can actually dispel some doubts in this industry, and also how do we move forward. Challenges are not new in our industry. I think all of you all being in this industry, we have faced so much of challenges. Ticket sales, shrinking marketing budgets, very, very short runways to plan events, and so on and so forth. So it's really, really not something which is very new. In that sense, we actually have a pretty good foundation in terms of like how are we going to tackle the current situation that we're in. So whenever we come to these kind of situations, what we wanted to do was come up with a panel with an industry perspective, and we're willing to take any of your questions also. And we wanted you to have some tools, some takeaway for you to share with your customers as you leave the session. And the starting point, of course, a great starting point is always legal implications. When there's a crisis, what's the first thing that you look at? You look at your legal obligations. And without further ado, Marlysa, please do share with us the legal aspects in terms of tough times. How do we counter them?
All right, okay. Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you to MBEW for this kind invitation. All right, so what I'm going to present today, I will first talk about what is tourism and hospitality laws. I will go into the legal implications of COVID-19 later in my next slides, but just to introduce what is tourism and hospitality law to the attendees here today. So generally, tourism law is just a set of regulations, international and national level, and it covers treaties, conventions, and it also basically includes rules and regulations in the country itself, and to regulate industry players, tourism industry players like tour operators and whatnot, and as well as the customers. So that is tourism law, basically, tourism and hospitality law. So generally, it covers all persons involved in tourism and hospitality. So that is in general sense. So what are the legal or the common legal issues which tourism and hospitality law face? So we have about 5 here, but I'm going to just talk about the common legal issues which are involved in COVID-19 era. So basically, the 3 most involved common legal issues are the first one, which is liability, interconnectivity and liability. Because we don't know who is the actual party who is liable for any kind of breach. Secondly, jurisdiction. Everyone knows that in traveling, we have international borders and whatnot. So different jurisdictions. So that is the second one. The third main one is uncontrollable forces. Cynthia, this is probably the most common legal issues in the industry, not just travel industry. In all the industries, force majeure clause have been spoken about a lot because of COVID-19. So that is basically the general overview of legal implications of COVID-19.
So, as the impact of COVID-19 builds by days, because this is so novel and things are happening in such a, things are just coming really, really hard and fast. I think one of the things which businesses, as a business owner, we look at the rights and obligations under contracts, and it's really coming into sharp focus. So Marlysa, in particular, you mentioned force majeure. How does that clause excuse parties from performing their obligations, or at least buying them a little bit of time from doing so? How do we do that?
Right.
Some contracts do have a force majeure clause, some contracts don't, yeah?
Yes, correct. Cynthia, you are right. Force majeure clause is not an as of right. That is the first thing that all parties need to understand. It is a contractual creature, therefore it needs to be in your contracts. You cannot automatically assume that your contract has a force majeure clause. It needs to be stated in your contract. However, if there is no force majeure clause, under the Malaysian law, we have the frustration of contract principle. COVID-19 may be considered as a force majeure, unforeseen circumstances, therefore frustration of contract may be applicable. However, this is of course subject to the performance by the parties and what have the parties done to mitigate any kind of losses for that particular party to activate frustration of contract. But under force majeure, it is a contractual in nature. The parties have to regulate inside their contract to say that there is a force majeure clause and it has to cover pandemic. If it doesn't cover pandemic, then it may not be enforceable at all. So it needs to be specifically mentioned that pandemic, epidemic, or some kind of disease outbreak for it to be applicable in this current COVID-19 era.
Thanks, Marlysa. So where legal contracts do not offer any redress, how would insurers address risks associated with this kind of crisis? Perhaps, Charles, you would take this question.
Yeah, okay. I mean, an insurance contract is basically a legally binding document between two parties, the insured, the party who's seeking insurance, and the underwriter of the party who's going to be paying a claim in the event of a trigger happening. So let me explain very briefly. The party requiring insurance could be an individual or a organization. Goes to an insurance company and says, I want to cover a certain risk. He will define the risk and give information to the insurer. Insurer may or may not ask for more information. When they review the information, they will decide whether or not that risk is insurable or not, or if it's a risk that they can write but under certain conditions. So if they can do it, they will then give terms. But before that, there's a principle of buyer beware, or caveat emptor, which is incumbent upon the insurance buyers. And also the duty of disclosure, which means they must disclose all information which is relevant to the underwriting of the risk, which the insurer should know. Right? If the insurer is satisfied with the amount of information given, they can then decide whether they can or cannot cover. If they can cover, they'll give you a formal quotation outlining what it covers, what are the triggers to the policy, and how much premium, what are the conditions and exclusions. So it's a contract between insured and insurer, and this is legally binding on both parties. Both parties have an obligation to observe, right? So when a person goes to an insurance company to buy insurance, he has to act as if he knows. He doesn't know, he has the obligation to ask questions. So he cannot assume that if he buys a policy for cancellation of an event, that coronavirus or pandemics are covered. And in most, if not all, insurance policies globally, as far as I'm aware, carries an exclusion for communicable disease. In some instances, because insurers have learned from the 2003 SARS event, they have learned that this is something that was new at the time, they must take precautions. It can be covered depending on situations, right? So currently the coronavirus situation, if I'm answering the question correctly, is global, is prevalent, is globally invasive. So there's no end in sight, there's no cure in sight, and it's still growing. Partly because of public apathy, they don't take precautions, so the risk increases. So it's like a factory is already on fire, and then you go to an insurance company and say, can I insure it, please? It's already on fire, it's uncontrollable. So that's why now, although communicable disease is an exclusion of the policy which can be bought based on certain information, currently no insurer globally will look at offering just such cover because it's going to be a sure loss. If I answer the question?
Yep. So having said that, insurance is usually intended to indemnify for foreseeable loss, and pandemic, like you mentioned, is not foreseeable. So how do we balance this now? Because this is going to be the new norm, right? The pandemic is here, it's not going to go anytime soon, there's no vaccine. So how do we balance a premium we would have to pay against the potential loss in such a situation? What can we do as an industry to make sure that we have some sort of protection, at least from insurance? Yeah.
Okay, as far as the pandemic currently that's raging throughout the world, there's no cover whatsoever. The best is to avoid the risk by not having any event or having an event with appropriate SOPs in place like the one currently now, where you have social distancing and you got your scanning and all that. So that's the only other solution we have. So yeah, that's about it.
So Kenneth, perhaps you could give us perspective from the exhibition industry. What are some of the toughest challenges that you faced, and how did you overcome it?
Very good question, actually. I think I came back 2 weeks just before MCO was announced in Malaysia, and I was traveling in Frankfurt. So what was interesting is when I was traveling in Frankfurt, I had a lot of inquiries already. I said, Kenneth, on the phone call, I said, what's going to happen to my participation in Dubai in, say, for example, in June? And what's going to happen later in the year, in September, or even maybe in December as well? All I could tell them is, I say, look, hang on, let's wait until we see what happens to the organizers coming out with the best practice, so to speak, anyway. But there isn't, until today, there isn't really a so to speak, best practice. What I've seen so far, and what my colleagues have done, and including myself as well, we have actually used the word reschedule many, many times. I've got exhibitions from March all the way till I dare not quote December 2020.
That's being optimistic.
Yeah, but yeah, that's true. But being optimistic, I hope travel bubble will open by maybe December, but I know that's not going to be reality soon. So, but I know that for a fact, I work for German people. So German guys, the contracts are all quite watertight. So if it's a postpone, it's a postpone. If it's a cancel, it's a cancel. It's reschedule, it's a reschedule. But for Germans to use reschedule, the word, that is, to me, very new. I've never heard the Germans actually say, we are going to reschedule the show to a certain date. But a reschedule, the word reschedule, I think, in my opinion, is much better than saying cancel, postpone, cancel, and what have you. It sounds better. It's like, I think the good word nowadays, we use safe distancing and physical distancing rather than social distancing. But there's a very negative connotation to it. But with the word reschedulement of any event, I think that brings forward to a lot of exhibitors or conference delegates who actually paid money, assuming the show goes on, then we can actually move those money towards the next date, right? But being organizers, we have to be a bit more, we also have to look at both parties. We have to look at both the customer, the exhibitor, including the organizer ourselves, and see we have to come to a point in between what happens after. And that is a very gray line where not many of us can answer, and then maybe Charles can give us a better insurance coverage.
Yeah, I think Charles, I think a lot of people in this instance actually, in this tough situation, we're looking at insurance, and it's come under fire actually, because we have a lot of big companies like the hotels and including the small agencies like the event agencies, and there isn't anything which covers business loss. You have event cancellation, which I believe some of you have used, and I use too whenever you have big events. We have an event cancellation. That's a specific risk. Event is cancelled. If it's cancelled, it meets that condition, and you get your whatever it's paid. But how about business loss? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we have this product called the event cancellation or risk policy. It's a contingent policy. It provides for losses in the event the event is cancelled to certain defined factors which are in the policy, like non-appearance by key speakers or key actors or key performers, whole show is cancelled, or last-minute withdrawal of permits which are already obtained. So those kinds of things are covered. And all the other associated risks with organizing an event, like the insurance for the personal accident insurance and other liability insurance, these are all associated with the organization of the risk. So those are coverable, and they're defined quite specifically in the policy. So communicable disease, as I've mentioned before, is an explosion. But pre-COVID pandemic is purchasable depending on the circumstance of the risk, where it's going to be held, number of people, and such. So with the current pandemic that's going on, whether it is the actual physical loss or the subsequent financial loss arising from pandemic, no insurance providing currently or offering, but there are instances where For example, the Tokyo Olympics, they bought the insurance for event cancellation, the whole package, whole works, plus an extension for communicable disease. Now, if this event, which is unlikely to be held, if it's cancelled in the end, insurance companies throughout the world who are supporting and providing funds to cover this event will suffer a potential loss of about US 250 million ringgit minimum. And there are more than one large reinsurer behind this. So if it does happen, the insurance industry will be affected. Yeah, so is that adequate?
Yep. So Para, what are the factors that we should monitor to correctly assess the feasibility of events in this time of the pandemic?
I think, thanks Cynthia, thank you everybody. You need to be very sensitive with the policies on a daily basis. You know, these are the times you need to be, the only skill that you can upskill yourself is keep watching the news. the right kind of news.
What else is there to do during MCO?
Yeah,
right?
that's the thing. So, and monitor how's the progress of how this disease is actually affecting our business, our lives on a daily basis. The slides are basically some of the things that we think that some pointers for you. Can you put it? Can you change to the other slide? Should I change it here?
The one before.
The first one, okay. Okay. Is there another slide? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So this is basically what we are living. I think you heard the word uncertainty many times, and you know, so whatever you want to plan your events on, these are the things that you should be taking in consideration. You know, the rules and SOP will swing up and down. Maybe sometimes they say 250 packs, then they say 400 packs, then they come back to 12 packs. You know, so we need to be very, very aware of the policies in place. And of course, I think all of us have been responsible enough the last 3 or 4 months on a personal self on how we apply the SOP on our daily lives. So, and I think Malaysia has done a fairly good job with you know, keeping this under control, and I think the government is very, very afraid of opening up big gatherings, and we be like what the last speaker said, the cluster of business events or cluster, you know. So it's on a daily basis how this is going to progress. I think our decision making needs to be based on, okay, we can do this next week, and if you got the means to do it next week, and then you have to carry out but are we ready? Do we have the systems in place? How the councils are going to approve it? How the MKN and all? So it's.
Sorry, provided nothing happens tomorrow.
Yes.
If something happens tomorrow, then back to the drawing board.
In a nutshell, I'm going to use the word again. It is a very uncertain business that we are in, because we are the very core reason why the gatherings are the reasons that create a lot of this disease spread and all that, you know. So it's, for me, there's only 2 kind of business strategy that we should, either we survive 2020, you know, we use our reserves to maintain certain amount of, you know, longevity in our business up to where things become a bit more clear, or we kind of go on a different streaming platform, or we kind of digitalize, try to monetize the other side of it, you know. Especially live events, it's tough to have a virtual event all the time, because, you know, how long can you watch a band play for 2 hours or 3 hours? And you know, the connection is very much into being there, experiencing it. Business events, I think there is a lot of chances where you can actually, you know, conduct a seminar and all that online, but still, I think the experience is not. You can never replace the experience, you know, the live experience.
So in the light of this current tough situation, do you think businesses should continue their current business model but mitigate the risks with some crisis management plan? Or do you think we should quickly reinvent the whole business model, because change isn't going to happen very likely because of this pandemic? We don't have a cure for it. Do you think it's something which we should pivot, and that's a key word everyone is talking about? How do we pivot and face the kind of challenges that we're facing right now?
I think pivot is in what a lot of people are already doing. I think there's a lot of people going and they're trying to get streaming shows on, they're trying to use different platforms to monetize events. I think it's basically on the organization's needs, because maybe some companies will have the reserves to hold on until things become better, but some smaller companies, they need to obviously find ways to survive during this period, or I think pivoting will be a solution, but even sometimes you need to really dwell into the cost of actually pivoting. Yes. Whether is it going to make business sense for you to pivot or not, So I think the most important word we all need to embrace now is reset and restart. I think that's a more positive word to look into than uncertainty, and even positive now today is not a very good word to embrace.
That is true. Yeah. That's not been a good word for 2020.
So we are looking for solutions. All of us, I think, daily we are finding to be in high spirit and look for solutions in our industry. But one step forward brings you back a few steps back with what's going on around. Yeah.
So in 2003, our country was faced with something similar, which was SARS, but of course it didn't have the far-reaching effects of COVID-19, but nevertheless it did impact our industry. And having been around for that long, yes, I was in diapers when SARS happened, but how did it affect your company's preparedness for COVID-19, having gone through SARS? What were the learning lessons that you had from SARS? Did you apply anything currently for COVID-19?
I had to cancel my Disney on Ice due to SARS. But nobody even knew the show was cancelled, because that is how the information technology was there at that time. And now, today, before it's cancelled, they're already asking you to cancel. So that plays a very big role in how our world is today with information. So SARS didn't really, it lasted maybe 3 months, 4 months, and we all went on with our lives after that. People thought it was a flu, a bad flu or something like that. But I think we are dealing with something very, very different here today. And with the information technology, the community, the netizens, they kind of channel you what kind of decisions to make when you're having a business that involves gathering. So it's a very different world from SARS to COVID now. Yeah.
So Marlysa, maybe you can elaborate. Now, I'm not sure if everybody knows, but there is a temporary measures to reduce the impact of COVID-19 bill. I believe it's going to go through Parliament in September. So Marlysa, maybe you can actually elaborate a little bit more on that bill, and how does it impact our industry?
Right, okay. The COVID-19 bill, we call it now, it's for temporary measures to reducing impact of COVID-19. It's now already been tabled in the House of Representatives. It's going to the Parliament soon in September. So the COVID-19 bill is going to be enforceable retrospective from 18 March 2020 until 31st December 2020. It covers about 12 different amendments in the areas of law. It covers first the inability to perform any obligation. It covers consumer protection, it covers industrial relations, it covers events for para, it covers tourism industry, specifically mentioned in the bill. So in terms of the legal impact on the industry, you have to look at the amendments that was made in the bill. The bill specifically mentioned especially for inability to perform contracts. If a party, there's two parties, if party A is unable to perform a contract, his or her contract, party B cannot take action against party A for any breach from 18 March until 31st of August 2020. And this cannot be done in the next 2 years. So this is the most important element of the bill, especially for force majeure clauses. And this, I believe, would impact the businesses because you cannot recover from your loss. If you have suffered any loss within that period of time, you cannot recover from the other party. So, but there is a dispute resolution clause in the bill on mediation. So if, let's say, party A and party B goes into a dispute, the minister can basically can give parties option to go mediation. The thing about mediation is it needs consent from both parties. If parties do not consent for mediation, then the whole thing collapses, basically. So I think in terms of the impact on businesses, that would be the most important clause that business would want to look at. Other than that is the Limitation Act. There is an amendment on Limitation Act where if the date for that limitation, I don't know if any of you know, for any civil matters, you have a limit of 6 years for you to take action. If that's the last day of that 6th year falls within 18 March to 31st August, you will have until 31st of December to take action. So that is another amendment that was addressed in the bill. Other than that, for tourism industry would be the Land Public Transport Act and also the Commercial Vehicles Act. This one is for, in terms of licensing. If, let's say, a license is expired within 18 March to 31st of August, you will have until 31st December to renew your license, so on and so forth. But answering your question, I think in terms of the industry and businesses, the first clause is the most important clause to look at. Yes.
So Farah, can we just have your thoughts on this? So these are the fundamental changes that are going to take into effect, and it is temporary, but you know, what do you see are the critical changes that we have to make in order to face this future effectively, besides what's going on right now?
You mean locally?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
I think this is a good chance to re-look at our key policies from the government on how we can really take a good look and see how they can help this industry, because I mean we have so much potential. I think business events in a whole, it's a very high impact economic industry if you really know how to fully utilize all the impacts that we can lend to the economy, because Malaysian economy is very based on services, hotels, tourism, and event becomes the kind of nucleus that puts everything together. And you know, I think if the policies can come in place now, while we have time, because there's not much events going on, so a lot of I think Messe, ALIFE, or we work together on setting up the SOP. And so that was a good I think effort coming together and saving the industry. But the future, I think all event organizers, the key to our business survival is positivity. I'm sorry to use the word positive, but okay, we need to be looking 2022. That's how it works. We always plan ahead. So I'm sure that Kenneth is already planning 2022, 2024, 2025, whatever it is. Even my tours we are already planning for 2022 and all that. But there are key elements in our policies that we need to change to be able to capitalize the 2022 when it all comes together. Are we ready to, you know, go there and grab all the opportunities or not? You know, so to make up what has lost the last 2 years or 3 years that we're going to lose. So that are the key things that we should be talking about now and finding ways to implement it 2022, 2023.
It's interesting that you say that, you know, positive has been such a bad word for 2020. But Kenneth, what is the most interesting trend that you've actually seen for 2020 actually?
Trying to survive.
But that one we do all the time.
Well, we do that every day anyway. You know?
We do that every day.
I think the interesting trend nowadays, it used to be many a lot of us are very business-minded. It's all about dollar and cents. If you cancel today, too bad kind of thing, and too bad, then you go back home and those kind of things, But the interesting trend nowadays I see is a lot of people are very, especially event owners, okay, they are being very understanding towards the event, your eventual exhibitor and the visitor eventually, Because for us in exhibitions, live events anyway, especially, if you see a durian Musang King, you want to try the Musang King, you don't want to see the Musang King, right? Or if you can see it virtually, see this is a Musang King, but you cannot try it. But what you want to do is you want to try the Musang King, isn't it? For food, for the experience anyway. So, but in my opinion, I think the important trend is what we see as, we are being human, let's put it this way, rather than being too much, too business-like, so to speak. And what is interesting is about what Para mentioned earlier about how what we can do as well. I think we as an industry, we should also come together as well, in general, so that the government can put in policies that eventually helps grow the industry to where it could be in the next few years and those kind of things, So in MACEOS, what we have done is we do a lot of lobbying with MICEP and of course MOTEC about how to have locally grown exhibitions or events in general. So that once those events are already in place and once we launch those events and if we are in place just in time, it will be, I think the world is an oyster, isn't it? So I think we should also gain a lot of industry as well at the same time, which means people will come to Malaysia, maybe do business. Something new, something different.
Yeah, something I can add on.
Yeah.
Yes.
In Taiwan, they did a 10,000 concert, people with 10,000 concert. The government gave out 2 million vouchers to the community worth $60 for them to go and watch or consume cultural products, arts, a museum, So things are already going back to I wouldn't say old normal, but we are getting back there.
So that's the reset that you mentioned.
Yes.
That's the start that we actually need.
Their countries are already working towards that. So where are we now? We have to ask that question. So these are the things that we should work as an industry together.
Sorry, Cynthia, just one more thing. And the beauty is in Malaysia, we have so many interesting things out there. Beautiful, interesting, things that we take for granted. I always tell, I think 2 or 3 years ago when I was with myself working very nicely together with Mei Peng and company, with the Future Leaders Day. So I told the not kids, but students then, they say, we for Malaysians, we take a lot of things for granted. Nasi lemak, once you go overseas, for those overseas guys come back here, they spend their holiday here eating the pork noodles, the char kway teow, whatever. Then they eat enough quota for 1 year. Then they come back again for the next year. But we take things for granted.
Yes.
We do not, we do not value what we have in Malaysia until
we lose it.
Yeah. It's like the, the mangrove swamps in Langkawi.
Yeah.
So if we do not know about, frankly speaking, I knew about the mangrove swamps, but I didn't know how important it was when I was in Langkawi. So when I was in Langkawi, during this, the tsunami, what was interesting is that mangrove swamp actually protected Langkawi as a whole. So if you don't do value all those things in Malaysia, then we lose that part. And we don't, unfortunately, the thing is I travel quite a bit, but we don't sell Malaysia as we should.
That is true. That is true. So that's something as an industry we need to come up with a concerted effort to actually do that. And that's part of the restart which Para actually mentioned. So we're going to take the floor, we're going to take some questions from the floor, and we have 2 already. So what are the key elements that need to be changed in policies? What are the key elements that need to be changed in policies? Charles, maybe we can start with insurance. What are additional actions insurance
Key
regulators
elements
are
that
likely
need to be
to take?
changed in policies?
Yep.
Just a difficult one for me to answer because policy contracts are dependent on information given for the underwriting of a risk to be insured. Of course, a contract is between 2 parties and binding on both. So it depends on what you want to cover and whether or not the buyer is aware of what is being covered. buyer of the policy, before he actually purchases the policy or says yes, he needs to, there's a responsibility on him, on the person, him or her, to understand what it covers. If they're not sure, they need to ask questions. If they want certain things to be amended, as in insurance policy, like if I, as a buyer, I want this exclusion to be removed, I'm willing to pay extra premium for it, then that should be made known by the buyer. The buyer is deemed to know what he's buying, or supposed to be, buyer beware kind of thing, right? Yeah. So if they're not sure or uncertain, then they should ask the right questions and be satisfied otherwise with the answers, right? So that's about all. So the policies, some policies, and most policies are not written in stone. They have certain conditions which cannot be removed. Certain risks cannot be insured. Certain risks are excluded, which can be insured provided there's underwriting behind it. Underwriting means you give me more information, I need more knowledge about what the risks are to me, and if I want to insure as an insurer, if I want to insure, what are my conditions? So those are things that can be changed in a policy, in any given policy, right? So, but we must understand that insurance is not meant to cover every risk, like moral hazards. They cannot cover all of that. Example, I insure my electronic goods in a factory for the agreed amount, but I leave the warehouse door open. I mean, that's a moral hazard, right? So that's also a duty on the part of the insured entity who owns the goods to take reasonable precautions to protect his property. In the event that those measures fail and the goods are lost through theft, burglary, or whatever, the insurance policy is there to provide. So that's about what I can say about policies in sense of insurance.
So insurance being a very hot question right now. You have another question, Charles. How can travel insurance cover COVID for overseas travel? How can travel insurance cover COVID for overseas travel?
That's a good question because travel insurance basically covers for, basically is a travel personal accident. Yeah. And there's also cancellation of flights due to certain incidents. So to the best of my knowledge, so if you bought an insurance policy 2 months before COVID happened, and it's cancelled, flights are cancelled, I think the policy can cover. I am not an expert on travel insurance.
Okay.
So if you buy, like in the case of the Tokyo Olympics, the organizers, because it's a huge event and lots of money is pumped into the organization of it, the organizers actually purchased a full event cancellation policy, full package, plus communicable disease. So they are well protected.
So they're covered.
So they're covered in that sense. So travel insurance, for example, I'm not sure I can answer that question fully. Sorry.
Okay, we have a question on mediation. So I'm guessing this is directed to Marlysa. Why would you go to mediation of one party can escape fulfilling the obligation? I think they mean, why would you go to mediation if one party can escape fulfilling the obligation?
Right. Okay. So basically, mediation is a dispute resolution forum. So if parties go into a dispute, then parties can go to mediation, court, arbitration, adjudication, and negotiation for them to resolve any dispute. So that is the reason why mediation was mentioned in COVID-19 bill. Because if parties go into dispute because of a breach of contract or non-performance of any of the parties under their contract, then they can go to mediation. It is not entirely escaping fulfilling their obligations per se, because they can't do it. They can't perform their obligation under the contract. So how do you resolve it? Both parties must have incurred cost. For example, organizing an event. There are a lot of parties involved. All parties have already incurred cost, but because of MCO, parties cannot perform. So how do parties come together and resolve this dispute or non-performance? So it is not escaping from their liabilities, but trying to get an amicable resolution for the non-performance, yes.
So we have an interesting question here, and I think Farah, you should take this question. It seems like other countries like China and Singapore has an optimistic view for the near future. Are we just looking through gloomy glasses, or are we lagging behind?
This is a very good question. I think clearly there is a combination of both. China had Wuhan had a pool party. I don't know how many people saw that, isn't it? Wuhan had a pool party of 5,000 people. You know, that shows how optimistic they are with managing, and we don't have that much of cases anyway, you know. We were very much under control. Are we overreacting the way we are, you know, on how event business gathering is all about, you know? So it's how the policy makers and the industry should again come together and put our heads together and find a way to find the grounds to move forward now. I think that's the key factor that I think we need the industry to take lead on it, and I think the government bodies need to listen to us for a change. And you know, we are basically have kind of run this industry to a certain extent very insulated from a lot of, you know, help and all that, you know, especially the live event industry. So I think we can assist the government in many areas on how to look forward on in getting this moving on ahead, you know. So we got a lot of ideas, a lot of help from the regional players that we are all connected to, you know.
Okay, so we're almost out of time, but if there's one thing you would like this audience to take away from this session, what would it be? Maybe we'll start with Marlysa.
Oh,
and,
all right.
Yeah, just the key takeaway.
Okay, key takeaway, I guess, for legal, in legal perspective, for all businesses, you have B2B and you have to B2C. So you as one particular business, you have to make sure that your own interest is protected in whatever policies or fine print or contract you enter with another party. With your customers, you have to ensure that your contracts, this is my suggestion, that your contracts has to be subject to change. Because you never know what's going to happen in the future. You don't know whether MCO is going to come back. So that is my suggestion, one of it. But yes, you have to anticipate the future and perhaps to protect your own interests. Yes.
Charles?
Yeah, if you don't mind, can you show my slides again? I just want to run through quick few seconds. The insurance industry plays a very important role in industry and business, but often it is seen as the villain in most cases because of failed claims. In all my years as an insurance practitioner, over 40 years, I'm quite used to this allegation or feeling that insurance companies are there to cheat people, but this is far from the truth. And even Bank Negara, who controls our conduct, had taken a very firm issue. So it is an issue where the claims are not being paid, there's a recourse for the insured to go to Bank Negara, to the Mediation Bureau, whatever, to make the complaint heard. So basically, I'll run through, I've given the slides to the organizers. I won't run through everything. My takeaway, plus few points, is that for any business risk that you have, be it in the industry, factory, home, or business event, or even a large event like Paras events, like Walt Disney and concerts, consult someone and buy the right insurances and be protected, ask questions if you're not sure. That's my takeaway. Thank you.
Kenneth?
Nothing to take away.
I wanted to say Safari 2020.
Yeah.
You're done.
Yeah, I'm done. I think we should, as business owners anyway, you know, or if you are a leader in your company, I think the key takeaway is how can we as leaders lead your staff or lead your colleagues in these times of uncertainty, which means you have to be, what's the right word to use? I think the other day I was listening on online. Nowadays everything is online now. So there was this online church. So one word that actually came out from the whole topic was fortitude. And I think that's where we as business leaders, or even say, for example, not I mean, business leaders, friends in particular especially, or even among a few of us here as well. No?
Yeah.
I think fortitude is a key word to take away, especially during this time period, because we can plan what's going to happen to next week, but if tomorrow something else happens, you know,
Something else have to happen.
then something else has to happen, yeah.
Well, the only constant is change.
Yeah, that's
right,
true, yeah,
right?
yeah,
So,
agreed,
Para, what's
totally
your
agree.
key takeaway?
I think the key takeaway is, for me, is reset, restart. This is what has happened
I
to
like
us.
the word restyle.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
also I think they say there's a saying that don't let a good crisis go to waste. So this is the opportunity now, actually to do something.
An opportunity for us to reinvent,
Ourselves,
basically,
yeah.
to reinvent ourselves. So our goal for today is that whatever role you have in the industry, we hope that you had something to take away, whether it was a new idea, a different perspective, or a fresh strategy. We hope that you can apply it, especially in these trying times. Our industry is facing one of our toughest challenges, but like Para said, you know, it should not escalate into a crisis of confidence. I think we should work together as an industry to come together, basically, to come up with reforms and policies, to move forward, to reinvent ourselves, and basically, you know, to meet this challenge with head on. We've done it before, not like we haven't done it.
Yeah.
But I fully believe if we work together as an industry, we can do it. So if everyone could have a round of applause for my brilliant panel.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.